Oh boy, another podcast. Microphone goes here. That's a little bit better. All right, now adjust like so, and then we call Paul Baylor. Skype makes noise like this. There we go.
Good evening, Drew.
Hello, Paul.
How are you this fine evening?
Yeah, I don't even know what time it is anymore. I'm doing better. Uh-oh. Skype disconnected. Uh-oh. This doesn't bode well. Uh-oh. Yikes. Big yikes. This makes for some riveting radio.
Hey, Skype crashed on me. That was adorable.
I wondered if it was me or you, because I've had some network problems all day.
Nope. It just 1 minute it was there, and the next minute it was just gone.
Yeah. Did it update?
I don't know what it did.
No.
I'm still recording though, so I think we're all good.
Yeah, I didn't stop recording either because that's good radio.
Oh.
All right, let's dive in here because I think this might be a kind of a lengthy one. Oh boy. Oh no. Paul might have crashed again. This isn't good. Oh boy. Maybe I'll just do this podcast myself tonight. Let's see if we can get him back on the phone. How we doing? You okay? You okay, buddy?
I certainly hope so. All right. Okay. That one might have been me.
Okay. Okay.
Just so we know.
It's probably that Logitech mouse. If I had to guess. If you had
Now I went to close a window, and I often use the Command Q shortcut, and I think my brain had changed the focus, but in reality, I had just launched Skype again. So when I hit Command Q, Skype was in focus, and it just went away. So
yeah, that can happen.
Yeah.
That can happen.
Oh, okay. Anywho, yeah, we've got some high quality content, I think.
We do. We got some good content this week, not just our usual jibber jabber. So we're gonna kick things off with a little bit of follow up here. You have in the doc, we have a podcast milestone.
Yeah. I got an email from hover.com. It's my domain register of choice, saying that, hey, doingtheirbest.com expires in 30 days and you should renew. And I totally renewed. So
yeah, I too got a domain registration update today. I was asked to update my personal information for the domain dongsdongsdongs.com, which I own.
No. Okay, so is anything hosted on it?
I think it redirects to well,
we're gonna find out.
Yeah, I think it just might redirect to my website, but I was redirecting somewhere else.
It redirects
okay, you all right?
to your LinkedIn profile.
Okay. Okay, that's good too.
Oh, I got some tears.
Yeah, sometimes I'm funny. Yeah, I think someone actually gave me that idea on Twitter because we were trying to figure out where I was going to point it. I was actually going to send it somewhere not nice. I was going to maybe troll somebody, but no, it's fine. I kind of like the idea of it pointing at my LinkedIn profile, so that's pretty good.
Oh,
that's pretty good. Yeah, so we're renewed for another year. Yeah. Our big 50th podcast Podstravaganza? Paul Stravaganza.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know, we got to figure out what we want to call it. Boy, I really wish we weren't in lockdown because for the 50th episode, man, I really want to go to that creepy hotel.
Yeah, I hear you.
That would make pretty riveting stuff. Just us in separate rooms recording a podcast at that hotel that no one's staying at. Interestingly, okay, so all right, quick homework assignment. Honest to goodness, the name of that place escapes me. What was the name of it?
I don't know. I'm gonna search the doc.
Yeah, it's in the doc. I wonder if they're still open right now.
The Garland Hotel.
Garland Hotel. All right, so Garland Hotel, Ohio. luxury lodging.
The website's still there, and it's still very green.
The website is still there. So if I wanted to arrive, so this is 47, 48, 49. So 50th would be the 21st. So if I wanted to arrive May 21st, and we were going to depart on the 22nd for one adult, children, $85 a night. I mean, I can still book it. So they're still open. I mean,
yeah,
it's not completely out of the realm of possibility. Anyway, all right. So yeah, that's cool. Are you going to enable SSL at some point, or are we pretty much over it?
I'm over it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I just checking.
Yeah.
I don't care.
It's Libsyn. Libsyn is the service I use to actually host the files in the website. And it's really nice because it makes it really easy, and it deals with all the crap about, what you need for iTunes. The Apple Podcast Directory, not to hate you. But one thing it doesn't do is SSL for custom domains, unless you contact support, and that seems like work.
Oh, it's not even anything that it's not even a setting that you can really control. No. Oh, how lame.
Yeah. So.
All right.
But otherwise, Libsyn's they're really great. Other than that, so.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
All right. So with that out of the way, then let's dive into the main kind of content of this episode. So Paul, it looks like you tweeted at me,
I did.
And you also have it in the doc that you did go back and watch Waco, and you want to talk about it.
Yeah. So it was. I usually edit the podcast Sunday morning. It's kind of a little bit of my routine. I was editing the podcast, and I heard you talk about it, and I was like, you know what? I'll give it a shot. I'll watch the first episode. So I probably watched the first episode it was probably after lunch on Sunday, so probably somewhere between 12 and 1. And then I just watched the next episode, and then the next one. And soon I had watched all 5, and I watched 5. I'm like, well, if I watch 5, I'm going to watch all 6. So then I watched all 6. Yeah, and it gave me feels, and there's lots of things I want to talk about.
All right. Well, before we dive into that, let's talk a little bit about the series and kind of how it relates to real life. So for those of you that haven't watched this, we're talking about the Waco mini docudrama series on Netflix. It's 6 episodes long, and what it does is it sort of details the events sort of leading up to the siege of the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, which takes place at a little place called Mount Carmel. And you get to see both sides of the siege because the series is based on 2 books. It is based on a book from the hostage negotiator for the hostage rescue team on the FBI, Gary Nosner, I forget how you say his name. And from the inside, you get an account of one of the actual survivors of the Branch Davidians, David Thibodeau. And you get to see kind of both of their events that sort of run up to everything that sort of happens at that event. Now, there'll be a link in the show notes to the overall siege, and I do want to talk about that because it is kind of an interesting case study as to what the government did versus what the Branch Davidians did, and there's still a lot of controversy to this day to what actually happened. And my main takeaway from the series was I had read a lot. I've read a couple books about the subject, and I've watched other documentaries that. Back when I had cable back in the day, there used to be things on the Discovery Channel or the History Channel about it because it was kind of a seminal event in, my lifetime, which that's a whole other thing we'll talk about later. But it's something that I very clearly and vividly remember watching and following when I was, a teenager. So, Paul, what do you think? So tell me about the feels. Tell me what you thought.
First of all, I want two fun facts. One of my managers early on actually lived in that town and could not get home when this first happened because they had the roads closed.
Yeah.
So that was a fun fact. And another fun fact, a little bit of a Metal World tie-in. The actor who played David Thibodeau, Rory Culkin, He was in the movie Lords of Chaos, which is the movie about the metal band Mayhem, and he played Euronymous, the founder of Mayhem. So that was a fun little.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, so you recognize that guy?
Oh, immediately. Yeah.
Okay, I had heard his name before, but I couldn't place him anywhere. And you've talked about Lords of Mayhem before, or
Lords of Chaos.
Lords of Chaos about the band Mayhem. Sorry, you've talked about that before on the podcast. Go back and listen to Paul's thoughts about that because that sounds pretty wild too.
Yeah. So first of all, like the so it's a dramatization of a real life event, right? Obviously, we don't know all these. Well, it's based off those two books, right? But I have a funny feeling there's a little bit of liberties and storytelling involved to make this into a nice like 6 47-minute episodes. But it was really, really well done. I thought the acting and the writing were both well done. I thought it captured the absurdity of what the Branch Davidians believed in without making it campy. Like, they really played respect to the fact that these people really believed Dave Rekresh's teachings. You could tell that, at least, well, when you're watching, during the opening credits, right, they make it very clear that this story is based off these two books, right? And then, who the authors of those books are. And you can kind of tell, especially on the, the FBI negotiator side, that, this was definitely his point of view. So I'm sure you have to take everything with a grain of salt between what actually happened, because there's some discrepancies about what actually happened, especially there at the end. There's a lot of, they did.
Yeah,
and then
there's
woo.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that happen at the end of the siege that, like I said, to this day are still pretty controversial.
Yeah.
And what makes it especially striking is that when all of that happened, it happened live on TV, right?
Yes, yeah.
And, so for me, right, here's what I really, really liked about the show, okay? So the first thing I liked is the setup, okay? So the show doesn't necessarily start with the Waco siege.
Nope.
It does, but then it immediately kind of cuts to a flashback of events that sort of lead up to it. And the event that leads up to it, ironically enough, was another very well publicized event where things didn't necessarily go so well, and that was the Ruby Ridge siege. Now, Ruby Ridge was an event where there was a gentleman who, if you really read about this, there's the big kind of controversy about Ruby Ridge is that the person at the center of it was pretty much tricked by the ATF into selling sawed-off shotguns to them. Like, there's if you go and you read about it, okay, the ATF basically arranged for an undercover agent to buy some modified shotguns from this guy. And at the time, what they were trying to do is they were trying to infiltrate the section of Idaho where the Ruby Ridge event took place, I should say, is very, very lousy with white separatists, right? Very, very, very heavy white nationalist presence, Aryan nations all over the place out there. There's a lot of heavily armed, fortified militia type compounds with these people in them. And the Ruby Ridge siege basically kicked off when this guy sold these shotguns to these ATF agents. So they arrest him. He goes peacefully, and then he's released on bail, but then he doesn't show for court. Okay. And then that leads to a not a hostage situation, but the gentleman in question, Randy Weaver, he shuts himself in with his family. Now, what you have to understand is this place, Ruby Ridge, is exactly what it sounds like. It is a house on top of a mountain. Now, Randy Weaver built this house with his bare hands. Like, it is not a place that I think that anybody who listens to this podcast or anybody who makes this podcast would ever want to visit or live in, okay? So they shut themselves in, and, when it's almost time to come out, him and his wife and his daughter and his son and everything, like, there's an incident. And again, it's one of those things where it's a very much two-sided story where there were some ATF agents that were kind of stalking the compound and observing it to see, if he was going to come out or if they could figure out a way tactically to go in and get him. And there's a confrontation. And at the end of this confrontation, Randy Weaver is shot, and his son is also killed. And in the firefight, there was a U.S. Marshal that was also shot. So after this standoff, things quickly escalate, and they call in the FBI to come in and take over and try to talk Randy Weaver out. Well, long story short, they talk him out, but not after there's another controversial incident, and this is represented in the show for good reason, in that there is an FBI sharpshooter who takes a very, very ill-advised shot and inadvertently, while trying to shoot Randy Weaver, who is fleeing back into his house, kills his wife. And that sparks a couple different things. And this sets a tone for something that happens over and over again in the series, where the government, in this case the FBI, makes a bad decision, which really riles a lot of people up. But, the court of public opinion sort of makes it go away, I guess. And, in the show, it is told through the eyes of this hostage negotiator who helped write this book, because he was one of the people that helped talk Randy Weaver out of the house. He arranged for someone that Randy trusts to come in and talk to him and talk him out of the house. And when this all resolves, okay, what's interesting is, and what really gnaws at this negotiator is that even though there was an unnecessary loss of life, because the negotiator makes it very clear, and like you said, this is kind of going to his side of the story, is he doesn't want anybody to get killed, right? His whole job is to de-escalate and talk everybody down, right? And exactly. This HRT team, this hostage rescue team, their whole mission is, we're going to go in and we're going to save the day, right? We got our gear, we got our guns, and we got our flashbangs, and we're going to go in there and we're going to fix everything.
Yeah, and it kind of made the point that like the hostage response team was kind of the beginning of the militarization of the FBI and the police force in general, right? It was they had high-end equipment, and I think they wanted to use
tanks. Yeah, tanks, APCs, modern assault rifles and body armor and communication equipment, and and this is the first thing that really struck home with me, because this went in a direction that I didn't really expect. But the thing that really kind of seems to stick in Nosner's craw here is that when it was all said and done, right, the FBI killed not a bystander, but somebody that really wasn't directly involved here. Like, his wife wasn't necessarily holding a gun, I don't think, and she got killed. And it made things a lot worse, because when it went down, the FBI didn't even know that it happened. It kind of happened as she was closing a door, and in the show, it's like, this negotiator goes to talk, and, oh, how's your wife? Oh, she's dead. You shot her. Thanks very much. Well, that puts the negotiator in a pretty tough position, right? But the one thing that really stuck with me is that Gary basically realizes pretty quickly that even as bad as that was, the government basically rewards this militarization and doesn't help, he sees it as you're rewarding the wrong behavior type situation. And I thought that was a really interesting angle, because I think there's a couple parallels there between a lot of things we see in our daily life, right? Like maybe there's a project, or maybe there's stuff in your community that, you just basically see it rewarding the wrong behavior. And I thought that was an interesting take on the whole situation.
Yeah. Like, I mean, if you haven't figured this out yet, spoilers. But yeah, Gary really felt that the situation was handled incorrectly, and the FBI made mistakes. And instead of, taking a step back and evaluating what they did, they were like, "Hey, yeah, the team that made all those, mistakes, yeah, let's give them more funding," right?
Right. And that really doesn't sit very well with him. And he even goes so far as to, he tries to do the right thing. He tries to sit down and have a conversation with his boss to say, hey, listen, what went there and down there wasn't cool, and I don't think this is right. And his boss is like, well, what can you do, right?
Yeah.
He kind of shrugs it off and
They had already shifted the blame of the whole situation off of the FBI and on to the ATF.
Yeah, which we'll talk more about that in a minute, because that's a whole nother kind of subplot of this movie. Holy crap. But yeah, you're right. They shifted the entire blame. And you know, Gary basically, he even goes so far as to almost to open a complaint against his counterpart in you know, that was sort of responsible for the ill-advised shooting of Randy Weaver's wife. And it causes some consternation, as you can imagine, right? You know, because he finds out, like, hey, I think you're going to be opening a complaint against me. And that definitely causes a rift in their professional working relationship, which, you know, again, if you've ever had to be in that situation in your work, you know that that's not a good place to be. And
right.
Especially in government work and when there's guns involved, right? So it's just not... There's a lot of interesting interplay that sort of happens in those first couple episodes about that. Which, you know, leads me to the ATF part of this thing. And boy, do they not look good in this docuseries at all.
No, they do not.
So Paul, talk about what happens with the ATF and how they were involved with this whole story.
So actually, I have some questions there in general. So I guess I'm going to start with the question is, like, the ATF kind of picks up on this compound, the Branch Davidians, because I believe they were buying lots of firearms.
Okay, so this
they make the reason. Yeah, so at some point they think this is something we need to go investigate, but they never really make it clear outside of the fact that maybe they're modifying firearms without a license.
Okay, so this is one area where I don't necessarily know if the show got it right.
Okay, all right.
Because in other documentaries that I've read and other books that I've read, this happens a little bit differently.
Okay.
So the Branch Davidians down in Waco at Mount Carmel, they have this, you know, it's a commune, if you want to call it something. It's a commune. It's a religious compound. It's a place that they built themselves on the plains of Texas. Which, by the way, for interesting reading, go read the history of the Branch Davidians and how David Koresh got control of that compound. That in itself is another story, because the interesting thing about David Koresh was he has priors. Before this all happened, he had an assault charge against him.
Okay.
And it goes back to sort of the power struggle that takes place before David is the leader of the Branch Davidians. I'm not going to go into that here because it's not super pertinent to the story. But before all this happens, David has a criminal record. Okay, he's on paper. But to your point, right, there's the whole reason the ATF knows about the Branch Davidians was they get a tip. And they actually get a couple tips. The first tip they get is a UPS driver makes a delivery to the Branch Davidians. And in one of the cases that is the UPS driver is delivering, the shipment is damaged and it's open. And when he looks, you know, whenever he inspects the package for its damage, he notices that there are grenade casings in there. Now, you don't ship grenades via UPS, obviously.
That seems like a no-no, yeah.
But there are grenade casings in there. And, you know, listen, you're a UPS driver on the plains of Texas. That's probably something you don't see very often. So you probably report that up to say, hey, by the way, did you hear about the thing that I tried to deliver to this compound? That's probably going to raise some antenna. And I'm sure actually, I know this for a fact that UPS has their own internal kind of security system, security group that monitors suspicious shipments because, you know, listen, it's a way to get packages to people that you don't have to deliver yourself. I'm sure that there are people who try to take advantage of that, let's just say. And, you know, they get wind of it. Now, the other thing that happens here, and there's a lot of misquoted sources about this, is that several, not neighbors, but people in the area, because remember, this is big open space, had heard automatic gunfire coming from the Branch Davidian compound.
Okay.
Now this, they talk a little bit about this in the show, but I'm surprised they didn't talk more about it, in that there were people in the compound that had federal firearm dealer licenses. When you have that kind of license, you are technically allowed to order and ship and receive firearm shipments from defense manufacturers, from firearm manufacturers, from law enforcement distribution things. Like, having that license enables you to do things that you and I normally couldn't do with firearms. Okay, you basically can become a dealer with that type of license, and it sounds like there was at least one or two people that had that kind of license at the Branch Davidian compound. Now, it's not entirely clear to me why they had it, but my suspicion is that, look, we're a religious group. People don't necessarily agree with our beliefs and our views. We fear retribution. We fear for our safety a little bit. We want to gun up, which, I think that there's a couple different ways you can look at that. I think that maybe isn't the best play, but, I'm not in their position, right? You don't really know what they're dealing with. I mean, you're pretty firmly in Bible country down there on the plains of Texas. Maybe you've got some people who don't necessarily agree with your interpretation of the Bible. Texas is a pretty heavily armed state to begin with. So I'm willing to kind of look a little bit past that. But
and also,
the ATF
they also kind of allude that they were making some money selling some guns at like gun shows or flea markets and stuff like that.
Well, but see, here's the thing, though. That in itself isn't necessarily illegal if you got the right kind of license.
Right, exactly, right. To sound like they were, they had guns and they were selling some of them to make money.
However, I have read a couple sources that have said, and I'll try to cite these in the podcast notes, that they were also illegally modifying certain parts of assault rifles to make them fully automatic or to make them non-compliant, to make them illegal in some way. Because let me try this another way. So, listen, I think I've talked about I'm a gun owner, right? I'm not necessarily a gun nut, but I'm a gun owner. And I know that I am not allowed to own, without special permission, guns that have a certain barrel length, right? My gun barrels need to be at least 16 inches or greater, or my gun is illegal unless I have the right kind of permits or the right kind of approval from my local law enforcement that, yep, you're allowed to have that. And there's steps you can take to have that. But if I were to go in my back cellar right now and saw 2 inches off my barrel, I have an illegal gun. Okay.
Yeah.
The same thing goes for the internals of what we call the lower receiver of the gun, which is basically, by letter of the law, the actual firearm itself is the lower part of the gun. In an assault rifle, you have what you call an upper receiver and a lower receiver. And the upper receiver is typically the barrel. Okay. And sometimes the stock. But the lower receiver, where the trigger lives and the mechanism that actually fires the gun, is what the government considers to be the firearm. Now, in the Branch Davidians' case, the part of the gun you would modify to make it fire automatic would be the lower end of the receiver, which would be illegally modifying a firearm. Now, the ATF, from what I have read, had also received reports that they were illegally modifying firearms, and they had reports of automatic gunfire. So the Branch Davidians were sort of already on the ATF radar before this all happened.
And then it sounded like they tried to get someone on the inside to kind of, to get proof, right? Because I think that what they had was they had a search warrant, but it wasn't what they wanted, right? It was like, a knock, please let us in kind of search warrant. And they wanted like really, really hard proof so they can go in there and, and raid the place. And I'm not sure how much of this is true, but the series definitely made it feel like the ATF saw this as their opportunity to save face from all of the blame that was put on them from Ruby Ridge.
Right. And they went through pretty big lengths to try to set this self up to be a big win for them, because in the show they talk about how, based on their kind of debacle of Ruby Ridge and how that all went down, they saw this as an opportunity, like you said, to save face, to secure future funding for themselves as an organization, because it definitely made it sound like they were on the chopping block. I don't know too much about that aspect of the story. I don't necessarily think it's untrue, but, when you look at the different law enforcement agencies that exist in this country, the ATF isn't what I would consider to be first team, right? It's not.
Yeah, they feel very, they're B team at best.
Yeah. Now, if you're an ATF agent out there, that's not trying to throw shade at you. It's just that you don't necessarily hear too much about ATF agents outside of Border Patrol stuff. Now, like, when you're dealing with drug smuggling or illegal firearms trafficking across the border, I think that's typically where they do their work, right? Yeah. They're not in on the main kind of stuff that we see every day, on the news or anything. It's not an organization you hear a lot of most of the time. So the ATF was set up, and they had an informant. Actually, I think they might have had multiple informants. I need to verify that, but they had an informant inside. And they also set up a surveillance team to sort of watch the compound. Now, to your point, right, they had a warrant, but they needed more. All they had was informants telling them, like, hey, there's a cache of weapons. But they had also heard that there was this whole child abuse aspect of what was happening at the Branch Davidian compound.
That's
so
right, yeah.
I think this is a good point to stop and kind of flip the script a little bit and talk about the Branch Davidian sort of side of this story. So why don't you talk a little bit about our hero on the inside, David Thibodeau?
Yeah. So, obviously this is what the series portrays, and obviously this is based off of his book, so I'm sure he tries to look the best. But David Thibodeau was someone who David Koresh kind of said, like, used his charm, because David Koresh was portrayed as very charismatic, and got him living on the compound. And and the portrayal that the Branch Davidian, the portrayal that the Branch Davidians is just that, fundamentally, like, they're just super religious, right? They're not bad people, right? There was no abuse. It was portrayed as very loving and very friendly, and a big sense of community and singular purpose, right? I get the feeling that they tried to be as self-sufficient as possible. They definitely had lots of supplies. But, the series does a good explanation of this as well, right? Like, a cult is really just a unpopular religious organization, right? Like, it's when they grow up and they win, we call them a religion, but when they, go sideways and lose, we call them a cult. And they had some David Koresh had some very interesting interpretations of the Bible. Of course, a lot of it was around the book of Revelations. And I believe one of their core beliefs was that at some point they would be as part of, like, it sounded like they would be part of a battle, right? That, like, the law of man would come against, the law of God, and there would be a conflict. So I definitely get the feeling that because of that, they kind of had a hoarder mentality, kind of a prepper, almost like a prepper mentality, right? Like, we're going to have, food and guns and, electric guitars, and we're going to be ready to hunker down and get this done. So yeah, but like the there was allegations of child abuse. I started doing a little bit of reading on myself, and there was allegations of, like, drug labs and things like that. And, if you take David Thibodeau's account on, at face value, there was none of that at all. They were just, they wanted to be left alone. They wanted to have their beliefs, and and kind of just be, like, I think more importantly, left alone.
Yeah, that was the thing, right? Like, they didn't feel like they were bothering anybody. Right. And I think that, like, David goes out of his way to sort of help save some of the image of David Koresh, right? Because, spoiler alert, he's dead. But he goes out of his way to give a side of David Koresh that maybe a lot of people didn't get to see.
Yeah.
And, at first you sort of sympathize him with a little bit, I gotta say.
Yeah, they're definitely yes, the show does portray him in that light that, you almost feel, you start to side with him. You start seeing him as, well, yep, his beliefs are a little bit different than mine or other people's, but fundamentally he came off as a really nice guy.
Right. And I think most charismatic leaders of groups like that probably do, right? Like, they have a following for a reason, right? Yeah. So he's obviously a very, very charismatic person.
Oh, and then there was all the polygamy. Yeah,
right.
About the polygamy.
And that's right. And that's the thing that they don't necessarily pull too many punches over, right? No. There's a lot of scenes that definitely make it clear that there's polygamy, mm-hmm. right? The men in the compound are expected to basically relinquish their wives, right? or their girlfriends, and David is the only one basically allowed to take wives. Plural.
Burdened with the, what does he say? Like, burdened with the responsibility of sex. Like,
right,
I will take this burden upon all of you. It'll be my responsibility to make kids. Because he also believed that, like, his kids would have a important part to play in, the end of days.
Right. And that's an important point, right? Because the whole reason that David, his kind of big, notoriety claim to fame was, and they talk a little bit about this in the show, but they go into way more detail in some of the other documentaries or some of the other books, is that he had a very distinct interpretation of the book of Revelations, which, if you've ever read the Bible or you're familiar with religion at all, it's the last book of the Bible. And it basically talks about the events that lead up to and during the end of days, when mankind will be judged, and you either sit to the right or left of God, and you either get into heaven or you don't, right? You're either made to suffer or you enter God's kingdom. And the whole book is basically written like one big acid trip, if I'm being fair. It is. It is. Like, if you were to pick up a modern Bible and read that chapter of the Bible, it's very strange. But David had a very interesting interpretation of it, and it plays into, and this is the ultimate kind of thing that I don't think that the FBI initially grasped during the siege, was everything that was happening was basically making his prophecy come true.
Exactly. Yeah.
And during the siege, the tanks and the gunfire and the killing and the armies laying siege was basically everything he said, which only reinforced and gave hope to these people that were in that compound, and they didn't want to leave. They wanted to stay with him, right? There were some people that did flee, but it just kind of played into everything he was saying.
Yeah, it reinforced all those reasons, because these people that lived there obviously made, sacrifices, right? They were living more of a sheltered life. I mean, they still had electricity and a television and stuff, but, they gave up some personal freedoms and other sacrifices to be there. And then when all this stuff started happening, just how David Koresh kind of predicted, it just reinforced all those beliefs. And I think for a lot of people, it just made them dig in more.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Which so you've got Gary on the FBI side. He's at kind of a low point. He fought a battle and lost internally. You've got David Thibodeau, which is showing you how this compound sort of works, and the challenges that they go through in day-to-day life. And there's some things that happen in his life where he's forced to marry someone like on the books to make it look a little bit better, right. And then you get to sort of the confrontation of these two sides of the story, and it kicks off with the kind of failed arrest of David Koresh.
Yeah, so it sounded, well, the ATF kind of made up their mind that today is going to be the day, and we're going to get all of our guns, and we're gonna load into the back of, it looked like farm wagons, like just trailers, and this is the day that we're gonna go, and we're basically gonna, they had plans they thought that the guns were in one place when they were in another. They were basically gonna go and kick in the door and go find these illegal firearms, probably also looking for signs of, child abuse, and, make a bunch of arrests and end up being the hero. And that went sideways.
Yeah. So they arrive, they try to serve the warrant. And what happens next, again, is a source of dispute.
Right.
The two main theories is the ATF had what they call a dog team. And the dog team was responsible for neutralizing any dogs that may pose a hazard to the agent serving the warrant. Mm-hmm. And one of the prevailing stories was that the dog team shot a dog. And when the gunshot went off, it wasn't immediately clear where it came from, which led to an exchange of gunfire with everybody serving the warrant and David's followers. The other side of the story is that the Branch Davidians shot first. It's one of those things where we'll never really know, but
the show has a very strong opinion about that, because they showed the Branch Davidians not shooting first. So the showrunners made up their mind on what they thought happened, Well, they picked a few sides, a few different places.
They did. They did.
Honestly, that's probably. I mean, to me, that's probably the most believable. Is, you know, like they went out of their way to show that the Branch Davidians did have dogs, right? And I mean, I could see, like, a dog sees a stranger, running around the fence and gets a little growly, and someone freaks out and shoot, But also, you can see the other side too. There was a lot of fanatics on the Branch Davidians, and maybe one of them did take a shot first, but both sides are very adamant that they were in the right. But during that initial stage of gunfire, David Koresh gets shot.
Yeah, David Koresh gets shot in the abdomen.
Yes,
and what's really interesting is that even though he is shot, he actually doesn't die.
No.
He's hurt, but he's tended to, and he starts to sort of recover a little bit throughout the series up until the end, right? Like he obviously loses a lot of blood, but they tend to his wounds, and a couple of his other followers die in the exchange of gunfire. Yeah. But it's worth pointing out here that the ATF, it's kind of fair to say they get their asses handed to them in this gunfight.
They sure do. They were not expecting it to go like this.
No. And by the way, it wasn't like they didn't show up unprepared. They came in their gear. Right. They came with their guns. They tried to do it, and the Branch Davidians actually repelled the attack. There is a very, very prolonged gun battle. They shorten it for brevity's sake in the show, but I think it goes on for almost an hour or so in real life.
That's a lot of gunfire.
And it stops because the ATF runs out of ammo.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they get a ceasefire. They're allowed to collect their wounded, and they basically lick their wounds and retreat. There's a lot of footage of ATF agents laying across the hoods of various sport utility vehicles being driven out of the engagement. There's also video of these guys basically using ladders to climb onto the roof. Like that. What they show in the show is actually a pretty detailed recreation of the event. You can probably go on YouTube and find video of this. These guys are trying to get through windows, and bullets are coming through the wall back at them, right? And it's a very intense engagement, and the ATF makes it out of there. Some of the Branch Davidians are killed in the process too, but there's actually a few ATF agents that also perish as well. And so then that's when the ATF is basically pulled off the assignment, and then our buddy Gary Nosner shows up to try to negotiate a peaceful resolution to the conflict.
Right. And it definitely feels like his big priority at first is to get the women and children out of the compound. I definitely feel like that was his number one goal, is like, we can de-escalate this. That way, if something, if more gunfire happens, right, like we get the innocents, right? We're getting all of those people, especially the kids, right? There was lots of kids at this compound, like a good number. And his number one priority was to, like, let's get those kids out. But he definitely seems to be, they definitely portrayed it in the show as kind of a war between, Gary, who wanted to make sure this was a peaceful negotiation and everything, no matter how long it took, right? He wanted to save people's lives. Where the head of the hostage response team, HRT, I can't remember what his name was. He just wanted to end it. He wanted to use force and go in and force this confrontation to be over by, just, hey, we have tanks, we have more people, we have better equipment. Let's use it and end it that way. And a big part of the show is just that conflict of, force versus negotiation.
Yep. And then, the rest of the show kind of plays out the siege, all 54 days of it, and kind of how it goes down. It ends on a rather controversial note, which, again, the actual siege, the final siege of the compound, is something that took place live on TV. I very distinctly remember watching it. There's a lot of, again, controversy around what actually happened. Again, it's not necessarily a spoiler for something that happened so many years ago, but there is a fire that breaks out during the siege. It is unclear to this day how that fire started. There is supposedly recordings of the Branch Davidians basically starting the fire themselves, spreading hay and gasoline and lighting the compound on fire to kind of go out and deny the government the ability to arrest them. There is another series of events where the FBI plan was to use tear gas, a form of tear gas, I should say,
right,
to basically force them to come out, to use tanks and armored vehicles to breach the walls and inject this gas into the compound. And the hope was that would make them come out, but there is a school of thought that gas also could ignite under certain conditions.
Yeah,
and that also led to the fire.
That's one thing I remembered from this whole thing was, people on the news basically saying that like if you use this gas in the open where it can't condense, that it's generally considered safe, but in close environments where it can kind of concentrate, that there's always a high risk of it combusting. When really wasn't intended to be used indoors because of this.
Right. And in the show, they very much take the track of this is the government's fault.
They definitely do. They definitely take the side of the Branch Davidians did not start the fires, that it was because of the tear gas.
Yep. And then we sort of see how a few people meet their end. And I think this is at the point where I won't necessarily talk about the ending too much, because for the things that I didn't like about it, there were a lot of things I loved about this show, about this series. And if you're looking for something to watch in these interesting times, this is something that if you were alive when this happened and maybe you haven't done a lot of reading or follow up about this is an excellent series to watch. I think it was very well made, frankly. I thought it was.
It was, yeah. It's a wonderful piece of media. It's shot well. It's not, like, obviously it has its opinions, but it doesn't try to vilify anybody. And the writing is good. The acting is phenomenal. Just a great cast. A great cast.
Yep. There's and again, there's a lot to like. There's a lot of people that you won't like. There's a lot of people that you will like that you didn't think you would like. Yeah. You get an interesting insight into government sort of interagency relations and inter-team politics within certain organizations, which is an interesting facet of the story that I think is handled very, very well. I'm glad you watched it. I'm glad you took the recommendation. I thought it was really, really good. I thought it was really good. So.
Yeah, again, like I second Drew. Like, it's a really good. He recommended it last show. I'm going to recommend it again this show. If you haven't watched it, it's 6 episodes. Each episode's about 45 minutes. You can watch it in a day. I'm proof of that. Yeah, it's really good. It's really good.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and strike this next topic because let's see, how long we've been talking. We've been talking a while, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah,
You know what? No. You know what? No. Here's what we're gonna do. Hey, watch this. We're gonna do this. You ready? I got this. Yeah. We're gonna do this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So, I think that fits. Yeah.
Okay. So this led, as I was watching the Waco series on Netflix, it got me kind of thinking a little bit. Again, I very, very, very much remember watching all of these events unfold at the Waco compound. And this happened in 1993. And let's see, if I can math correctly, I was a teenager when this happened. Okay. Again, it was broadcast on every major network. It was on the news almost every night. It was hard to avoid, right? Especially in 1993 when I might have had the internet, but it was dial-up and I wasn't on it all the time, right? So my main source of news and the main source that almost everybody got their news from were from newspapers and television, okay? But it got me thinking. It got me thinking about kind of big events in our lifetime, like things that people still talk about to this day that we remember, right?
Right.
And I was thinking, like, what was the first thing that you actually remember, like, vividly, like a major event that you remember from when you were growing up? Like, what was the first big thing you remember?
The first thing I have, like, really strong memories of was the Challenger explosion.
Okay.
That happened in I'm pulling it up here, 1986. So I would have been like 9. So I think I was in 3rd or 4th grade at the time. And I mean, I know not every school watched it live, but where I was going to school they made a big deal of the fact that, hey, there was a teacher going to space, and we were all geared to watch it. What's her name? Oh, I must take away my space nerd card. The teacher, she was planning on doing lessons from
Krista McGough.
Yeah, she was planning on doing lessons, and we were going to watch all of those throughout the week. Like, our school made it a big deal. And I remember they had grouped everyone into a handful of classrooms. They had turned off all the lights. They had pushed all the desks away, and I remember sitting on the floor, crisscross applesauce. They had wheeled in the television because, not every classroom had a television. Television only had a few of them. They were on these big metal rolly carts, big tube televisions. And they wheeled it in. They plugged it in. We started watching maybe 15 minutes before liftoff. And, yeah, we had our eyes glued on it when, when it exploded. And like, my biggest memory was just kind of like the broadcasters, right? The journalists kind of, giving you a play-by-play. You could tell that something was wrong and they didn't know what to say or what to do. There was lots of awkward pauses. Lots of, we're waiting for confirmation from NASA, stuff like that. And I don't know who made the decision, but they didn't turn it off for us. We watched until, we didn't watch all day, but, we watched for, a good 15, 20, 30 minutes after the explosion as they were kind of going through and realizing that, there was a, a pretty massive explosion, and it didn't look good for those astronauts. I remember those moments very clearly.
Yeah.
What about you, Drew?
So the Challenger's up there for me. I remember exactly where I was and what I was doing when that happened. I did not see it happen live. So the school that I attended at the time, there were classrooms that had access to television. Some of the classrooms did not. I was actually in the process of getting ready to go to gym class, and there were kids that were in certain classrooms that got to watch it. And I remember very clearly walking down the hall and walking past rooms that had the TV on and seeing something happen. We didn't go in the rooms and watch it, but I didn't actually get to see what had happened until I got home from school that night. But I very clearly remember that something was happening that day that wasn't normal. Like, it was like in the air, right? Which made it all the more surreal. Someone had said, like, oh my God, like, look at those I just remember people talking about how vivid the rocket was or something. There was something about the rocket. I don't think people really I don't think the kids at our age really understood what had happened and grasped, you just watch those people die type of thing. But I'm with you. I very distinctly remember that those kids weren't, like, ushered out of any classrooms. Like, they kind of let it roll, right? It was like, what do you do?
Yeah, what do you do?
And no one really complained about it. Like, it was something that happened, and it was a really big event that occurred, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you can't shy away from it. But yeah, that was one I have pretty vivid memories of. Now, the one that's on my list, and this is why I wanted to talk about this, because it doesn't make sense to me. I very clearly remember, even though I was extremely young, the Mount St. Helens eruption.
Really?
Yeah. So that took place in 1980, and I might have been a year old, probably less than a year old, but I very clearly remember pictures on TV of the volcano and pictures in the newspaper, because my dad used to hold me and read the newspaper. I just have these very, very sporadic flashback memories of the Mount St. Helens eruption.
Oh, that's
because that technically happened within my lifetime, but I was extremely young. But I just have these very fragmented memories of the event, right? Because you're a couple years older than me. I don't know if you remember that at all.
Not even the slightest. Yeah, I have no all my recollections of it was what I've learned like when I was in school.
Right. But I just remember seeing like footage. Like I can very, and it's very, very small memories. Like it's 1 or 2 seconds at a time, but they're just in my memory banks, right? And I know that sounds weird, but I swear to God, I remember that. I don't know.
Huh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's the one I remember. But there's been other big events that have sort of like happened in our lifetime, right? Like I think everybody likes to point at 9/11 as kind of being like the defining thing of our generation, but I sort of disagree with that because I think that's for kids that grew up. Because I mean, I was in college when that happened, but for kids that were younger, right? I think that means. Not that it means a lot more. I think it means different for them because they've had to grow up in a world as a result of that. But if you look at other things that happen in our lifetime, and I know we've talked about Chernobyl, we've talked about the fall of the Berlin. Well, we haven't talked about it, but the fall of the Berlin Wall, Waco, right? Oklahoma City bombing, O.J. Simpson murder trial, and thing, right? Even Ruby Ridge, which happened in '92, which wasn't as big a news. I don't necessarily think, but I don't remember it. I don't remember it near on the what's the magnitude of something like a Waco.
I remember
right?
the fall of the Berlin Wall pretty vividly. I remember that was on the news nonstop for.
Yep, I do too. I remember we had CNN and it was all over it, right? Because that's back when CNN headline news first launched and everything, and I remember that pretty vividly as well. But those are like the events that really stick out in my mind from like when I was little.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just thought since we were kind of taking a trip down like really disturbing memory lane tonight.
No, that was good. I like that. Well, not all the horrible things that happened, but those
the Atlanta Olympic bombing, right? That was another one, right? I'm trying to think if there's any other ones that I'm forgetting here.
Yeah. When was the Oklahoma City bombing?
That was like 90. Yeah. What was that? 90, 94, 95, I want to say.
I remember that. Remember those.
I was still, I think I was like, I was in high school when that happened.
Yeah.
Columbine, I think, was a big one for us too, right?
Columbine. That was significant.
Yeah. That was another big one that I kind of remember.
I also remember everything about the day that Kurt Cobain died. So.
Yeah, okay, so that's a good one, right? I think that is very significant because, Nirvana was like huge, right? They were huge. But you know what? That didn't resonate with me as much just because I really wasn't into music when that all happened.
Oh, yeah, like grunge was a very important part of my life at that particular time. And I remember it was I was the stage manager for our high school play, and it was the night before our first show, so we're going through a full dress rehearsal, and everyone was getting their costumes on and their makeup on, and then we got the word, and there's me and my group of my friends, it hit us like really hard. And I remember like standing around in a circle saying like, okay, this is just something we're just going to have to like put it on the shelf and get through these next few days and get the performance on. And then we can deal with that. That was a big deal for me at that time. Yeah.
The LA riots were another big one. Do you remember that?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the whole Rodney King thing in the LA riots. That was huge. Trying to think if there were other ones that were. I feel like there's a couple other that sort of escaped me. I don't know. I mean, the Unabomber, right?
Yeah,
like, the Unabomber was huge.
Yeah.
Man, we're hitting all the high notes tonight.
Yeah, very uplifting episode.
We should probably stop. We should probably stop.
Yep. Next episode, we'll be back to our regular scheduled, just nonsense.
Yeah, just like shit posting the podcast, right? Like we'll be right back at it.
Yeah.
All right.
We're gonna wrap this up. We're done.
Yeah, let's do it.
You can find us on the internet at doingtheirbest.com. and on Twitter at doingbestpod. You can find me on the Twitters at Paul Baylor. That's Bahler. And where can we find you, Drew?
Yeah, I'm over on Twitter at Pitfurg, Pittfurg. You can find me on Twitch at the same name, Pittfurg on Twitch. Even though I haven't streamed in a while, but that's going to change this weekend because I need a pretty big release. I want to do a lot of gaming this weekend, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, thanks for hanging in with us.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone. Stay safe.
Later.